Good morning, students. Today we have the second meeting of poetry, and last week we talked or discussed poetry in general, and also last week we talked about the first title of our class, reading a poem. In the meeting, we talked about the way to read a poem. We also, as a slide, we talk about just let your eye light on it, and then also the term the mind's eye. And last week I also gave you an example of verse, any composition in lines of more or less regular rhythms, usually reading ending in rhymes is verse. And I gave an example, names of months in a year. It seems to be a poem, but actually it is not. And then last week I also gave you the way how to read a poem. There are three ways. The first way is to read just with our physical eyes. And then second, we have to know the meaning of the words in the poem. And the third, we read the poem silently, but according to the explanation, it is better still to read a poem loudly. And then here now we come to the continuation of our discussion last week. Some poems, like bells, seem heavy till hurt. Do you know bells? Yeah, bells are made of iron. It is very heavy. When we beat the bell, then usually the sound is very heavy. Listen while reading the following lines from Alexander Pope's Dancer. Attacking the minor poet James Rolfe, who had sung the praises of mistress named Cynthia, Pope makes the goddess of dance exclaim. So it is an example of a poem that means something. It can be very difficult, it can be very happy, but also it depends on us who appreciate the poem. Silence he walks, while Ralph to Cynthia holds, and makes night hideous answer him he owes. So every line, in the end of the line, the word ends with the pronunciation of the voice ools. Ools, wolves, wolves, and wolves. Okay, now we have a poem by William Butler Yeats, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. 9 pinrose will have there a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. Do you know the meaning of Innisfree? Yeah, it is a kind of place, a name of place, I mean. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, go to somewhere named Innisfree, and a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. You can imagine a cabin, small room built of clay and wattles made. Do you know when you are still a child Usually when you play in a ground, then you make a small house, or a small car, just that like this one. 9 pin rows will have a hive for the honeybee. 9 pin rows will have rows, pin rows. It's a kind of small vegetable. You can check in your dictionary what is the meaning of pin. And live alone in the bee loud. So you can imagine how quiet the place. You live alone in the bee loud clay. And I shall have some peace there, or peace come dropping slow. So you come to that place. The place is very peace, very peaceful. For peace come dropping slow. Dropping slow come from above and drop slowly. Dropping slow, dropping from the fields of the morning to where the cricket sings. Dropping from the fields. Fields of the morning. Do you know fields? Fields are kind of, this one, to cover the morning where the cricket sings. Small bird sings. There are midnights all a glimmer and noon a purple glow. So you can imagine that kind of condition. Midnights all glimmer, noon a purple glow. So if it is noon, it is not too hot, and if it is at night, it is not too cold. An evening full of brilliant wings. So in the evening, there are many linnets, with the light. I will arise and go now, for always night and day. I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey. I hear it in the deep hut score. So here, I will arise and go now, for always night and day. I hear lake water lapping. So every night, every day, you hear lake water lapping with low sounds. You know the meaning of lake? Yes, Dana. Dana lapping with low sounds. Lapping like this, low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement grey. But actually, you are not there, but you live in a big city. I heard it in the deep hut score. So the writer or the poet imagine that he lives in a very small village with peace, but actually he or she lives in a big city where he get bored. He doesn't like to live in a city, but because of that condition that he has to live there. But actually, he wants to live in a very remote place, in a village, and get peace there. The life in a village is very peaceful. Okay, a paraphrase of the old poem might go something like this. So, the meaning of paraphrase is in language easier to forget than that of the original. So, please remember, the meaning of paraphrase is in language easier to forget than that of the original. The paraphrase is like this. I'm going to get up now, go to Unisri, build a cabin, plant bees, keep bees, and I live peacefully by myself amid nature and beautiful light. I want to because I cannot forget the sound of that leak water. When I am in the city, a grey and dingy place, I seem to hear it deep inside me. So this is the paraphrase of the poem. Yeah? The poem of Innisfree. Yeah? Remember, the meaning of paraphrase is language easier to forget than that of the original. It means that you use your everyday language. I'm going to get up now, go to industry, build a cabin. And also remember the pronoun. The pronoun of the paraphrase must be similar with the pronoun in the original poem. If the original poem say I, in paraphrase you also have to say I. And if the original poem use she or it, when you paraphrase, you also have to use she or it, etc. Whenever you paraphrase, you stick your neck out. You affirm what the poem gives you to understand. And making a paraphrase can help you see the central thought of the poem, its theme. So the use of paraphrase sometimes, it can help you see the central thought of the poem, its theme. Yeah? So the theme is central thought of the poem. Theme isn't the same as subject, the main topic, whatever the poem is about. In Yeats' poem, the subject is the lake Isle of Innisfree, or a wish to retreat to it. But the theme is, I yearn for an ideal place where I will find perfect peace and happiness. Themes can be stated variously, depending on what you believe most matters in the poem. So just pay attention between subject and theme. Yeah? Theme is the central thought of the poem, while subject is the main topic, whatever the poem is about. Taking a different view of the poem, placing more weight on the speaker's wish to escape the city, you might instead state the theme. The city is getting me down. I want to get back to nature. But after taking a second look at the statement, you might want to sharpen it. So, when you state the theme of the poem, you can say something else. You can have different point of view with your friends. So be patient, be focused on your view, taking a different view of the poem. So whether you view from some portrait or you maybe focus on another view or another object in the poem. After all, this Innisfree seems a special, particular place where the nature world means more to the poet than just any old trees and birds you might see in the park. So, as you know that in big cities, we will find old trees, birds, many kind of birds, but it's different from old trees in a small village, birds in small villages. So that's different according to this point. Perhaps a strong statement of theme, one close to what matters most in the poem, might be, I want to keep the city for my heaven on earth. Remember, my heaven on earth. So sometimes we are very boring, we are very bored with the condition, and we want to go to somewhere else because we want to find heaven on earth. And according to the poem here, the heaven on earth is a place in remote place, that's a village. That, of course, is saying in an obvious way that it says more subtly, more memorably. Yeah? More subtly, more memorably. So when you read this poem, because it uses specific words, then you can memorize it easily. That's the meaning of memorably. Now we talk about kinds of poetry. Number one, lyric poetry. Originally, as its Greek name suggests, a lyric was a poem sung to the music of a lyre. This earlier meaning, a poem made for singing, is still current today when we use lyrics to mean the words of a popular song. But the kind of printed poem we now call a lyric is usually something else. For over the past 500 years, the nature of lyric poetry has changed greatly. So, remember the definition of lyric poetry. Yeah? Lyric poetry, for the first step, lyric poetry was a poem sung to the music of a lyre. Yeah? So, a poem sung to the music, remember. And also, now, although the meaning of poetry, lyric, is a poem made for song, but there are some changes from time to time. Ever since the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, poets have written less often for singers, more often for readers. In general, this tendency has made lyric poems contain less with music, and since they can be put on a pitch, more thought and perhaps more complicated feelings. So this is a kind of revolution, revolution from poetry for singers, and then after the invention of printing press, then poetry for readers. And because nowadays most poetry are for readers, then according to this explanation, poetry now more thought and perhaps more complicated feelings. Because if you sing a song, usually you will use simple words. But when you read a poem on a piece of paper, usually you have much time to understand the meanings and then to enjoy it. So usually now poetry, more thought and perhaps more complicated feelings. Here is a rough definition of a lyric as it is written today. A short poem expressing the thoughts and feelings of a single speaker. So this is the definition. But remember, it is rough definition. Rough definition means it is not rigid. It is not the only one definition. Can be many definitions, but it is rough definition of lyric, a short poem expressing the thoughts and feelings of a single speaker. Often a poet will write lyric in the first person. Once more, the characteristics of lyric poetry usually use the first person. I, for example, I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree. But not always. Instead, a lyric might describe an object or recall an experience without the speakers ever bringing himself or herself into it. For example, of such a lyric, one in which the poet refrains from saying I. So many pronouns, usually pronoun I. And then narrative poetry. Although a lyric sometimes relates an incident, or like piano draws a scene, it doesn't usually relate a series of events. That happens in a narrative poem, one whose main purpose is to tell a story. So remember, the characteristics of narrative poetry. The main purpose of narrative poetry is to tell a story. So usually the story is long. Yeah? In Western literature, narrative poetry dates back to the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, composed before 2000 before Christ, and Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, composed before 200 before Christ. It may well have originated much earlier. So you can imagine how old is narrative poetry. Babylonian, do you know Babylonian? It is around Iraq now. Yeah? Babylonia is around Iraq, or yes, Iraq and Iran. And then 2000 before Christ. So if we count from now, it is more than 4,000 years ago. In England and Scotland, storytelling poems have long been popular. In the late Middle Ages, ballads or storytelling songs circulated widely. Some, such as Sir Patrick Spence and Bonnie Barbara Allen, survive in our day, and folk singers sometimes perform them. So some poems are very old, and it is a kind of story from one mouth to another. Like this one, the most or very popular one, Sir Patrick Spence and Bonnie Barbara Allen. Evidently, the art of narrative poetry invites the skills of a writer of fiction, the ability to draw characters and setting briefly, to engage attention, to shape a plot. Needless to say, it calls for all the skills of a poet as well. So, a writer of narrative poetry usually must be very skillful or very witty, because he shaped plot. Yeah? He has to make the setting briefly. So it is a kind of novel, but it is very short. Yeah? So the poet must be very skillful to arrange their words. And then the last, dramatic poetry. A third kind of poetry is dramatic poetry, which presents the voice of an imaginary character or characters speaking directly without any additional narration by the author. So this is dramatic poetry. Presents the voice of an imaginary character speaking directly without any additional narration by the author. That's dramatic poetry. A dramatic poem, according to S. Eliot, doesn't consist of what the poet would say in his own person, but only what he can say within the limits of one imaginary character addressing another imaginary character. Strictly speaking, the term dramatic poetry describes any verse written for the stage, and until a few centuries ago, most playwrights like Shakespeare and Molière wrote their plays mainly in verse. So this is the point of dramatic poetry. Dramatic poetry here, pay attention. Dramatic poetry describes any verse written for the stage. So it is actually mostly written by Shakespeare and Molière. You know that Shakespeare is a playwright and he writes the play mostly in verse. So like Indonesia, pantun. Most of Shakespeare's statements in the playwright, in his plays or drama, usually use verse. But the term most often refers to dramatic monologue, a poem written as a speech made by a character other than the author at some decisive moment. A dramatic monologue is usually addressed by the speaker to some other character who remains silent. If the listener replies, the poem becomes a dialogue in which the story unfolds in the conversation between two speakers. So again, we have another term, dramatic monologue. So dramatic monologue, where a character in a poem like give a speech, and then there is no interlocutor. His friends are silent, or his counterparts are silent. This is the meaning of dramatic monologue. So someone speaks as if he made a kind of speech. So this is the speaker, and there are the audience. Okay, thank you, students. I think this is the end of our class today. And I hope you can read again the material. And if you don't understand, you can ask me when we have discussion in Google Classroom. Thank you for your attention and see you next time. Assalamualaikum.